Welcome to Networking RX, a podcast devoted to helping business professionals like you enhance your networking skills in order to become more proficient giving and receiving quality business referrals and improving the overall quality of your life and the lives of those around you. The Networking RX podcast is a production of AmSpirit Business Connections, an organization whose mission is to empower business success through networking.
Who remembers the ad campaign from Miller Lite? It was their original ad campaign, Taste Great, Less Filling. Just as some context, in 1973, the Miller Brewing Company launched its Miller Lite. That's L-I-T-E. Whole nother conversation, but they went with L-I-T-E because it was a way that they could actually grab a trademark. You couldn't use the word L-I-G-H-T because it was too descriptive. So they went with L-I-T-E. Anyhow, it was one of the first low-calorie beers, and it began really kind of a light beer revolution, if you will. And what they wanted to do was they wanted to address the challenge of introducing a new product without cannibalizing their existing Miller beer brand. And they had an ad agency, McCann Erickson Worldwide. And so they came up with the ad campaign, Taste Great, Less Filling. Now, 1973, if you are too young for that, and probably many of you are, they've reintroduced it from time to time. It really was a very iconic advertising campaign. And a lot of what they did was they would have celebrities doing some sort of skit. If you go on YouTube and do a search for Miller Beer, Taste Great, Less Filling, or something along, you'll get a slew of these old commercials. They're commercials, right? A minute long, maybe a minute 30 seconds, somewhere longer. But the one I saw, they had a bunch of ex-NFL football players, Dick Butkus, Ray Nitschke from the Packers. I mean, they're all at the bowling alley, and they just get into an argument. It was just a really small piece of it talking about the beer, and someone said, well, it tastes great. The other team was like, less filling. No, tastes great, less filling. Now, the interesting thing about that is that both those things could absolutely be true, and they both, well, I don't know. I'm not really a beer drinker, but supposedly both were true, that it was less filling because it was a light beer, but it still tasted great. So it's entirely possible that two things can be true at the same time. And I use that as kind of a conversation to talk about some different study I actually ran across I was on Sciblog. I've read quite a bit there. This is the first one I've talked about in a long time, and the title of it is Why Helping Strangers Earns You More Respect Than Helping Your Friends and Family. And on the surface, it's like, okay, yeah, that makes total sense. I mean, you're supposed to help your friends and family. And so what they did in these studies is they had different tests, and they have some statistics that they report in the Sciblog. In the Sciblog article, over 53 million Americans provide unpaid care for adults. That labor is valued at over 450 billion annually. And if you stop and think about it, without people taking care of their loved ones, that would put a huge strain on society. I mean, my stepmom largely takes care of my father. Now, my father's able to get around. He's able to feed himself. But his memory's failing. And so my stepmom has really kind of stepped up, no pun intended, to care for my father. And my wife did the same my wife and her siblings, I should say, give them all credit too, did the same for my father-in-law. And it just, that's unpaid labor. Now, again, without that would put a huge strain on society. But if you contrast that to, there are 8.8 billion hours of volunteer time that Americans every year provide to people who need assistance. And that's valued at about $195 billion. And again, those are volunteer hours, right? I mean, both are volunteer. One is for family, valued at about 450 billion, and the other one's for non-family. We'll call them strangers, if you will. 195 billion. And so they did a series of studies and surveys, and they found that richer people were more likely to volunteer, while poorer people were more likely to provide unpaid care and support. So, I mean, if it to put somebody in a facility is, at the time of this recording, it might be eight, nine, $10,000 a day, depending upon what's required of the facility. Now, my mom and my stepmom and my dad are in a assisted living facility. I don't know what they pay. It's none of my business. I'm not going to ask. It doesn't really matter. It's just comparing and contrasting what we do for family and what we might do for a total stranger. And essentially what they have found is that people who do things for total strangers, people look at that as they have a higher opinion of that. Oh wow, that's really neat what they've done for strangers, for somebody they don't know. They've volunteered their time, and that tends to have less value than, oh, you're taking care of your father. That's really nice of you. And I think part of the reason for that is, you know, through time, prior to Social Security, that was really expected. I mean, there was I think there was a time, I think I've got this right, where that was the youngest child's obligation, right? The oldest had an obligation, the other children had certain obligations, but the youngest child was to basically take care of the parents, and that was their lot in life. And I would imagine some children weren't happy about that, right? I'm the youngest. My siblings get to go off and be doctors and lawyers and marry and do all sorts of things, and I got to take care of mom and dad. Now, that was back in a time where we might not have lived beyond 50 years old. In fact, when Social Security came into being, people weren't living much past 65 at that point in time. And that was part of the impetus for Social Security, is that there were people who were largely abandoned by their kids, if you will. Um, and so how we look at, taking care of our family is less valued than providing care for a stranger. That's what the study finds, and I get it. I'm not saying it's true, but I understand where people's mindsets are. It's like, okay, you're supposed to take care of family. That's what you do. Going and taking care of a stranger and volunteering your time, that's above and beyond. And so it just has a greater value. So that's the less filling portion of my argument. What about the taste great part of my, not argument, but just kind of making 2 points that both can be absolutely true. And the second point I want to make is that how you treat your family is something that people are mindful of. And if you treat your family well, you take care of your aging parents, you take care of a child who is sick, and I'm talking maybe an adult child who's got certain issues. Stepping in to help family, while we might value taking care of volunteering hours more than taking care of family or helping family, there is a tremendous value in how we treat our families. And the reason I believe that, and I don't have a study for this, this is warning, this is Frank's conjecture, but how we treat our families and how people see that is very important, because if you don't treat your family well, then you're certainly not going to take care of a friend or a stranger. And so I think people are watching us. Well, I'm reasonably certain people are watching us. I mean, I've seen through the years. Well, I saw with respect to my grandparents, how my parents my dad and his siblings stepped up. Now my grandmother, my mother's side, my mom's mom, she just had a heart attack and died. So there wasn't really a need for this long-term care, but I certainly saw it with respect to my grandmother, and there were months there where people were caring for this person. So you see this example I saw with respect to my wife's grandmother, where it was literally a year and a half where kids are just stepping up to take care of that. And so they set the example. My point in all of this is, yes, volunteering is really important, certainly with respect to whatever. Doing things for total strangers is important. It might be more valued in people's eyes just because of the nature of going above and beyond. But there is a tremendous value in how you treat family and how you treat, certainly how you treat close friends, because people see that and they extrapolate that onto themselves, and they're like, okay. And again, I'm speculating, this is my conjecture, and this is probably happening at a very subconscious level, but wow, they're taking care of their loved ones, they're a good person. And I can trust that, as just a networking partner, there is some level of care and concern for me. Whereas if somebody doesn't take care of their loved one, you might say, oh my God, if they're not willing to do something for a loved one, then how would they, how could I trust them? I mean, if they're, to a degree, I'll call a sacred relationship, how you treat your family. And if you're not willing to treat your family with dignity and respect, then clearly you're not going to be, or not clearly, but certainly I'm not going to take a risk on it either. So both those things can be true, that, their society can place a higher value on what we do for strangers versus what we might do for family. But there is a tremendous value in how you behave towards the people in your family, how you behave towards your siblings, certainly how you behave towards your parents, how you behave towards a spouse is certainly something that kids look at. But our networks are looking at those things too. Our networks are watching us, and they may not see a total window into our personal lives, but to the extent they can see those things, how we treat our kids, to the extent they can see those things, will impact the degree to which we earn the trust of people who are less important to our success. Let's just put it that way. Take care of your friends. Take care of your family.
Thanks for joining us on the Networking RX podcast. Please put what you've learned into action today and let us know if you have questions, comments, or ideas for future topics. You can email them to us at podcast@amspirit.com. That's AmSpirit.com. Finally, so you never miss an episode, be sure to subscribe to the Networking RX podcast through iTunes, Overcast, or however you receive your podcasts. Now get out and network with someone.
The Networking RX podcast is the copyright production of AmSpirit Business Connection. All rights reserved.